One of the things that was pointed out very early on and was very apparent if you look at the IGC flow diagrams, and I do have the joy of being an engineer as well, is that they clearly shut down in response to flooding in Montreal. And that was clearly the result of the increased inflow in the Ottawa River. The thing that wasn't mentioned today was what happened above the Switzer Dam on the Ottawa River. People may not be aware, but the Ottawa River was empty above the Switzer Dam. And I mean empty. You could see the bottom, docks were out of the water, people couldn't use their boats. The Switzer Dam is well north above Deep River on the Ottawa River. And it's run by the Ontario Power Generation, and they drain that. And many people from around the Ottawa area feel that's directly responsible for the flooding that happened in Dunrobin and Gatineau, and clearly contributed in a significant way to what happened downstream in Montreal, which, because of 2014, they shut down the outflows. So a big contributor here, and something that we have to address, is why OPG authorized the complete drainage of the upper part of the Ottawa River. I know this is being investigated, it's being discussed, but the reality is that was a lot of water. And the lame excuse that they've given publicly is, well, we were worried that there was going to be a second wave of floodwater, so we let it all out. Well, you know, Mattawa is a nice place, and it shouldn't be flooded either, but when you consider the economic impact of perhaps flooding Mattawa as compared to flooding Montreal and the entire southern shoreline of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, that's a major contributor. And I think that what happened there has to be considered.
Well, would you please send any info you've got
Sure,
to
I can
us?
send you some clippings too.
Yeah. We need to understand all this and integrate this into the discussion.
The second point I'd like to make is the members of the IJC, I assume, are political appointees. And they're federal political appointees, and we're in the middle of a federal election. Who appointed these guys? How do they get appointed? Who do they actually represent? I don't know those things.
Can anybody here answer that question? Who appoints them?
Yes.
Please, thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you very much. I apologize, I'm cold. I'm Karina Smith-Gatzke. I'm the mayor here of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. They are political appointees. When we met with the IJC on August 27th, they committed to us to having further meetings and open houses and public consultation with the individuals. After that meeting, during that meeting, I made it clear that the residents would be moving away from their homes or seasonal residences and go away. And they said that they couldn't do anything during a wet period because they are political appointees, that basically everything has to shut down. So we're in a lame duck period, thank you. But what I do know is that there are meetings being booked as early as October 22nd. So what we are being at this point is placated. We were very clear during that meeting, and I have a fellow mayor sitting right beside you that was at that same meeting. It was very clear that they said that they would do this because they have had a failure to communicate with the residents and the businesses that are affected by the decisions that have been made by the IJC. They have not come forward with that, and we've made it abundantly clear that that is not acceptable. I sent a letter as late as yesterday stating as much publicly, and that's been published as well. So we are trying. It may not be what everybody thinks. We're not trying hard enough, but you're getting silence, we're getting silence at our level, and we will continue to fight on behalf of the residents of this township, as well as all the townships of the United Counties of Leeds and Ripple affected by this flooding.
A couple points on that. One of the things United Shoreline Ontario is lobbying and advocating for is there have been dozens of municipalities that have written letters and they get ignored. What we need is one letter with 40 municipalities on their signatures. We need one letter with 11 chairs. We need one letter from all of the fire chiefs. We need one letter from all of the yacht clubs and the marinas. We need one from each of them to say we are unified and we are not accepting this. Because the problem is that Brighton gets dismissed, Clarington gets dismissed, you get dismissed. Because we're not united. And I know there are 6 mayors that are currently fighting to try to get all 40 municipalities together. John Tory, I've never even heard him utter Plan 2014. Where's Toronto, right? So the problem is that we are just so easily dismissed. The other piece you spoke about the Ottawa River, and that is a dam. There is an independent inquiry into what happened. There are lawsuits happening based on the Ottawa River. However, one of the exciting news pieces we were told is that there are now 2 shoreline representatives on the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board. The first one was announced from New York, a fellow named County Legislator Bill Violet, I believe his last name. And the other was just announced from Montreal. There is no third. Lake Ontario doesn't have a rep. Does anybody know Trudeau's riding? Does anybody know where the International Joint Commission Canadian chair is from? Montreal. Where is Ontario's representation? Where is Premier Ford?
Another question or statement?
Thanks. So as your local mayor pointed out, I'm also a mayor of a municipality along St. Lawrence and Elizabeth Town, Kittley. And I need you people to know that I was in your position before I got elected as mayor. So I used to be spokesperson for a residents association with a concern, and I see your group doing a lot of the same things that my former group did, doing the deep dives, doing the research, and trying to arrive at a very credible platform to go forward with. And so I commend you for doing that in the spirit of helping you bolster your foundation of credibility. One of the limits that was conspicuous by its absence in the material that you prepared is the eye limit. And so one of the proposals that I heard very strongly today is to drain it, drain the bathtub at the end of the season to prepare, create the buffer for the next season. That was something that I took to the meeting that my colleague was at, along with a number of others. And so that's where I learned of this eye limit. And so that's the limit that is imposed with consideration for ice formation. So just understand the implications of what you're requesting, because I can foresee you'll get pushback around the effects of your request, and the discussion will take place around the eye limit. So expand your deep dive into the eye limit so that you're prepared to deal with that type of pushback. It was something that I didn't know until that meeting, and it deals with anchor ice and the formation of stable ice so that you don't end up with ice packs that create uncontrolled flooding, which is the very thing that you're trying to deal with now. So I encourage you to cast your net a little bit wider and help the officials, with your cause, but you need to provide us with a foundation that doesn't have any cracks in it so that we don't get dismissed.
It's why the water has to be dropped before the end of December, right? We have less than 90 days to get the water out of the system, because the second we're at the end of December, the eye limit takes hold, and they have to close the dam to ensure stable ice formation. So that's how much time we have, gang. We don't have a lot of time for studies and reports and whatever else, right? The IJC is hosting a webinar in November for elected officials, right? And what we're going to hear is about the epic rains and how much snow and how much Lake Erie, whatever, but whether or not they're going to start talking about the I limit, the F limit, the L limit, we're missing that really honest, transparent conversation. And ultimately, what the challenge is right now is, in order to get the water out by the end of December, you have to suspend shipping. That's the exchange. You can't open the dam at the levels that are required and have the ships run. So the ships talk about the billions of dollars that this is going to cost, but the treaty says the order of precedence is. Criteria H14 says everything for the riparians, and we're not operating that way, right? But we have until this end of December. So what role do each of you play in writing letters, speaking to elected officials, speaking to media,
putting signs on your properties, bumper stickers on your cars, whatever it is, that whatever power we can exert on this situation.
Thank you. I think I said, just 1 second, I saw a question here.
Yeah, my name is Blue McIntosh, and I'm a member of TIA, the Thousand Islands Area Residents Association. I just want to thank TIA, first of all, for having this informational session. I think we can all agree about the hardship. I had a thing written out here, but I don't want to take you much longer. It's really unfortunate that those 2 years of unprecedented rain happened just as Plan 2014 came in. It looked as if the plan had caused it, but it didn't. Supposing the rain had come while Plan 1958 DD was still in force, would there have been an outcry to rescind it? And I don't think so. So we're looking at fixing something and being careful where the blame is to be. Actually, important to focus on the solutions and not the blame. Everybody has said bring the water level down before the winter. I'm supporting the efforts of Save the River to talk about patterning, which means that some days or times you suspend navigation so that you don't have dangerous turbulence coming down through, because if you've got a narrower river and the same water going through it, it creates much more of a velocity. The next thing is encourage an independent review of the process. I won't go through all of that. Encourage the IJC, we all need this, to improve its communication skills. The mayor has talked about how proud you had, they promised you an open house and it didn't happen. Lots of people have sent messages to the IJC and not received an answer. That had said, listening to the presentations and the information given this morning, the elephant not in the room is the IJC. There's nobody here, and I don't know whether they were invited to come and
Yes,
speak.
they were invited.
Okay.
They were not invited to speak.
They were
They were invited.
Okay.
Every politician that I could drop an invitation off to at any place and by email.
Because somebody I was speaking to had said that they had particularly not been invited. I don't know.
Not intentionally.
Okay. Save the River was not invited until I told them it existed and they got hold of you.
That's correct.
And the River Institute was not invited in Cornwall. They could have had something.
Blue, I had 6 days to pull the shit off.
I know. I am full of admiration for what you have done. I'm not saying that for a minute, but they were other.
Is there a question?
Okay, I'm not making a question. I'm saying it's a question of balance. I'm shortening this right up. And I think everybody said that.
Did you help them prepare for this?
She did. Everybody has helped me prepare. Everybody. So listen, it's this.
Thank you, Blue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Can I make a quick comment? Prior to the webinar that we ran on September 11th, when Bernie ran the webinar, the International Joint Commission contacted us and asked for a seat at the webinar and asked for the presentation in advance. And we said, we'll do one better. We're going to run the webinar for you a week in advance. Because we want to make sure that we are not putting out any information that is incorrect. We want to make sure that we are bulletproof. So we ran our webinar for the IJC. The Canadian chair, the American chair were part of that, and 15 of their highest ranking policy members and engineers were in that meeting. It was supposed to be 1 hour. It was 2.5 hours, and the conclusion was they could not poke holes in any of this. So even some of their engineers said, oh, Bernie, have you thought about this, this, and this? And Rob Caldwell said, actually, Bernie's right. Actually, Bernie's right. Actually, Bernie's right. So the webinar that is on our website from September 11th was vetted by the IJC, by the Canadian chair, the American chair, and 15 of their members.
There's a question.
Remember I said that the IJC is listening? They are hearing the message, but no action.
Sure, I got a question right here. Go ahead.
There are places in the world where shipping has to wait to go through some passage because of tides. Why can't shipping wait to go through the seaway? Some places along the seaway, either Lake Ontario, Montreal, someplace in between, for water to go through the dam.
So I think that's a Ken answer, but simply it's patterning, I understand, and that's being proposed by Save the River and endorsed by Thousand Islands.
Nobody knows the answer to that. It's really not part of the plan. The assumption is ships will be able to come and go. We're all scheduled in advance. We need to change some of the new rules. That's a legitimate option.
So they could let a lot more water out through the dam, but it would disrupt shipping, is my understanding. I've heard Dr. Frank Romano mention a couple times. Right, it's hard to say. But I've heard him mention a couple times that to do this, let more water out would disrupt shipping, that you need unanimous agreement on the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board to do so. And he's mentioned that there's a shipping conflict of interest on the board. Do you know anything more about the membership of the board and who these people are with conflicts of interest and what can be done about it?
I'm not familiar with any conflict, but they don't talk to me.
Yeah.
Dr. Frank was fired for disagreeing with the board.
Yes, that's correct.
He wouldn't mention any names.
It's political, there are influences, but it doesn't matter who's got connections where. If you get rid of the requirement for unanimity, wrong meeting, unanimity, one person can't vote a good idea down. So somebody who's prejudiced to Montreal, or to the shipping industry, or to the island riparians, takes the power away from them to cancel a good idea.
One more.
What's the breakdown of US and Canadian membership overall and in the survey?
It's about equal.
3-3.
Yeah, and by and large, the same across the board, equal representation. Yes.
So are we looking at, without major changes to Plan 2014, are we looking at consistently high water levels into the future? Is that what you're telling us?
The plan is for higher highs and lower lows.
And that is not, there's no equivocation in that determination. Next year, without major changes, we can expect another season of high water.
If we don't have more serious deviations, higher outflows right now, we are guaranteed another flood event next year, another season of flooding. It's guaranteed.
Okay, there's one.
I have a question. Sure. Why has the St. Lawrence River Seaway and Lake Ontario not been declared an emergency zone like other areas have that are then eligible for, monies that come from the Ontario government to fund, repairs and things like that, especially if your home is a private residence? We fail to understand why that hasn't happened. I think that, we've been in communication with a lot of people from our area. We're from Brockville, and there seems to be a resistance for them to actually get behind and declare this, and we have no understanding why they're not doing this. Whether they have to fund this thing, or there's some kind of mechanism, but we just fail to understand. I'd like that. If anybody knows anything.
I think we got an answer.
Thank you, it's a very good question. Part of the reason, so you're talking about DRAIL, the Disaster Relief and Assistance for Ontarians.
That's correct.
So that particular program very clearly states it is only in benefit of primary residences, you don't have to declare a state of emergency in order to enact that program. So we've been waiting in our township to go back out with a representative of the Municipal Affairs and Housing individual. It's supposed to be scheduled this week. We've been waiting for the waters to recede far enough so that we can actually see the damage, because the water has not receded enough for us to see how bad the damage has been. Okay. But when you're talking about declaring a state of emergency and why that may not have happened in your municipality or the other municipalities in the area, when you declare a state of emergency, it's to deploy extraordinary measures. So in your particular case, when you're talking about the number of residences that were flooded out, that you needed extraordinary help to actually protect, that in that particular case, I totally understand watching those firefighters do what they did. Definitely strikes a chord. But what happens is there's collateral damage that comes with that as well. If you declare a state of emergency, there's a possibility you can't get insurance on your residences.
You don't have it anyway.
We don't have insurance on our residents anyway, because if you're in on the river.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
My husband's an insurance broker, so I can absolutely.
Folks, you saw my house, 2017.
I'd be happy to
I've
give you
now
his
got insurance.
His contact information. But the reason that we didn't have any roads wash out, I can only speak on behalf of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. We did not have any roads wash out. We did not have any bridges that were compromised. We did not have any water intakes for municipal water that was affected. We did not need the army to come in to evacuate people. Those are the extraordinary measures under the provision of declaring a state of emergency. So had we declared a state of emergency, we could have hurt our residents more than helped them, because we offered the sandbag assistance as much as we can. We had individuals call in that were elderly. We had our firefighters go out and help those individuals. There was only a few of them that asked, but just to be clear, the DREO is a separate entity from declaring a state of emergency, and DREO does not have to be, doesn't require a state of emergency in order to be reenacted. I apologize.
That's not what they're saying, Brock, but that's not what they're saying. I got letters to say that that's not what they tell. That's not what they're saying.
You don't need to be it doesn't need to be a state of emergency. Your community needs to be activated. The language is activated.
Yes. So it requires somebody from your township or municipality.
It requires more than that. In order to be activated, there has to be a threshold of damage. So my community was declared a state of emergency in 2017. We had some houses over $100,000 in damage, and these are people that are 80 years old, and that's all they have. But not enough houses had the level of damage that was required to hit the threshold, so we were not activated.
That's the term.
Not one community on Lake Ontario was activated in 2017 or 2019.
But they are in Ottawa, they are in Nipissing, they are in Hastings
Yep,
Township.
but not one for Ontario has been activated. And let's be crystal clear, it is $200,000 for internal damage. But your riparian walls, your outbuildings, your shoreline, anything like that. So Americans are getting $50,000 each to repair their walls.
Maybe.
There is no plan. There is the DREA doesn't even cover that here. Even if you activated, there's not a single penny unless you have to replace your furnace and your drywall and that sort of stuff. All of your outbuildings and everything else, not part of it, right?
Only our
And in 2017, I did not have overland flood insurance. You saw my home. In 2018, I got overland flood insurance, and I am paying less. And we were declared in 2017. I am paying less for my overland flood insurance than I was without it. So there are many insurance companies now that now have overland flood insurance. So do the research, because even though you are in a floodplain, there are companies that will cover you.
Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions here. I've got one for Douglas.
I have a question to ask Sarah. One thing I think is missing is what's going to happen to the floodplain. We have the CLRCA here, and they would have a wall if the floodplain was sent up another 200 feet. Has that been? Did you give that any thought at all?
So the question is about what happens to the floodplain, and the floodplains are all being redrawn. So, and there are communities that are absolutely up in arms about it. The mayor of Brighton spoke about this 2 weeks ago, that if the floodplain lines are redrawn in Brighton, that it actually decimates his community's ability to develop, because so much of his municipality is on the water. And not only when the floodplains are redrawn, it also completely changes what the bylaws say you can do on your properties, right? So our municipality, our conservation authority tried to push that this year. They went to our council and pushed for new floodplain maps, which now has been pushed off for 2 years. But had council approved it, if my house burns to the ground, I can rebuild. But if it floods, I cannot. Yeah, council said no, they've rejected it, right? So this is also part of the challenge that we have, is we don't have emergency recovery plans that actually help us when the waters come. We have very hostile conservation authorities that aren't letting people rebuild their walls, right? Their revetments. In my community, one person's revetment fell into the water in 2018. They wouldn't let them rebuild. In 2019, her home was completely compromised. But she wasn't allowed to do what was required. So Plan 2014 creates so many other spin-off issues. The other one is there is no legal requirement for your municipality to help you during a flood. There is no legal requirement. They can actually choose not to. And our municipality hired a consulting firm to do this research and study it. And most municipalities don't even have emergency management plans for the hazard of flooding. So what happened in our municipality, and I could do another whole half-hour presentation on that, 2017 was an absolute gong show. 2019, my municipality is the best practice in emergency flood response. By the time the waters hit, we had over 10,000 bags deployed. We had high schools building thousands of sandbags. We had 3 or 4 different NGOs coming in, St. John's Ambulance and all sorts of different players in advance. Our 80-year-olds didn't move a sandbag. But there were other communities where their municipality said, there's a pile of sand up there in the middle of town. You can only touch the sand if it's your primary residence. Now somehow you, 80-year-old homeowner, has to figure out how to fill 10,000 freaking sandbags and get them down to your property. In my community, it was hundreds of volunteers, heavy equipment machine operators over weeks, and they saved our community. Our community would have been decimated this year if it wasn't for our fire and operations. But there's no obligation.
I've got one more question right back here, and then.
Do we have any realtors in the room? Is there one realtor?
There's a realtor up front.
Okay. Can you tell me what's going to happen to future listings? Is there going to be a box in future listings that's going to say prone to floods or not prone to flood? And what's that going to do?
I agree there should be.
Could you repeat the question?
The realtor, if you're selling your house, you have an obligation to,
Here you go. You need to use that.
as a homeowner, if you're selling your house, you have a legal obligation to tell anything that is wrong with the house. If you've had flooding or anything, you can sell your house without telling that and then be liable down the road. So, but I agree with you. That is a tricky question. The Ontario Real Estate Association and the Canadian Real Estate Association are trying to come up with something in regards to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Stephen.
Save the River seems to be saying this line that it was not 2014, that it was the full lakes and the unprecedented rainfall and the freshet and so forth.
IJC too, same thing.
Right, so it seems like it would be useful to have some dialogue between TIA and them to get on the same page. Because
TIA
is pretty much
is on the same page in terms of conversation with that group, for sure. And we've encouraged as many people we could on a very short time frame to come out for this event. And then they were invited. John could not make it. His grandchildren take precedent. We understand. Had I had 2 weeks in advance, John certainly would probably have been a speaker here. And so anyway, that dialogue will carry on, we hope. So here are the outcomes as I was passing around frantically invitations to businesses or people I could get to quickly to pull this off. There was, so what's the call to action? What are we going to do about this? And my position is the same as it has always been. This is a necessary moment for everybody in our community to get together. I don't have to agree with anybody in here to know that we're all on the same page. The water is too high. That's it. So now, moving forward, I would suggest there are several things that we can do. Number one is buy your membership upstairs if you haven't already. Number 2 would be to please make a donation to the Thousand Islands Association or to United Shorelines of Ontario. Something so we can help deliver a message. The only thing, I've exhausted what I can do. I mean, I'm grateful you guys came here on 6 days' notice. Thank you. But beyond that, I only had one recourse that I found that I'll throw out here, and it is so far-fetched that people laughed at me more than once and will continue to. The IJC will not talk to me. They have no need to talk to an individual. My politicians have a difficult time finding the time for me as well. So how could I get the IJC's attention? On Thursday this week, I filed a claim with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And I've claimed, and it has been accepted, my claim, and it's in the queue now for my interview. And my claim is that the Thousand Islands region that has been experienced by people here since the 1700s, Westerners, and well before that with natives, has a very distinct culture. I think that this area has, and that's why I came here 28 years ago. Beyond that good-looking girl I found here, was the very distinct water culture that's here. I've claimed cultural genocide, and it's been accepted. So, it's a little out there. You might have to have a few cocktails to figure out if it makes sense. I'm willing to share my position with anybody that would like it. If you go to the Human Rights Commission, if you go to them and you go online, if you are a private business owner on the waterfront that thinks that if this happens one more year that you could lose your business, you have a human rights claim. You are being put out of your place of business by a single entity, and in this case, a pseudo-crown corporation. That's a human rights clause. That's all I can do. I'm sorry. I think we're just
The idea is to turn up the heat. Really. That's about all we can do to make a difference. One thing you can do to make a difference is to get involved. Not just give money and so forth. We appreciate that, and memberships, but get involved. Volunteer on a committee or get involved with this organization here. Talk to Sarah. There's many ways to get involved. I look forward to working with Save the River and other area nonprofits that care about this river, this lake, this region. We all got to get tied together. So volunteer, show up. And we won't do anything as crazy as one of these in a one-week planning cycle again. Thank you.